my phone is being annoying. My phone is being annoying, so now it looks like we are having a sideways conversation. I don't know why it can't just, orientation is locked, rotate device back. I don't know why it can't cooperate with us, but yeah, my internet is being slow at my apartment. I don't know what that's about. Maybe it's about the recent rainstorms or whatever. So I decided that I would stream on my phone today, and now for some reason my phone is not letting me. It's not letting me go sideways. So I am doing it up and down. We'll do it this way. Um, yeah, yeah. There we go. That's not good though. This is a strange way of doing things. Thank you all for being here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I am having yet another conversation with all of you. It's really, really great. This one's only on YouTube because I'm doing it from my phone. And yeah, so welcome. Glad you're here. I'm just trying to find the proper way to leverage my phone. I guess we'll just do it that way. How's that? All right, everybody. Yeah, it won't let me turn my phone, and yeah, a lot of weird stuff. Technical difficulties. My internet's been very slow lately. It's working, but it's just slow. I'm looking at it. It's so I'm just trying any way possible to reach my audience. So welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Glad that we can just have a Saturday afternoon chat. Thank you for being here, regardless of the technical difficulties. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Now, normally we're on many different platforms. Today we are just on YouTube. We are only on YouTube, but hopefully my internet starts working and starts being up to full speed, and then we can be on the different platforms. So yeah, it's been a while since I've streamed on my phone, but yeah, how but well, everybody. So the way we generally do things is that I give my opening remarks, and then from there we do a roll call. We find out who it is, who's watching, who's in the chat. And then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's generally how I do things on these streams. Now, since we're on my phone, I will type down your super chats as they come in. That's the way we'll do it. Since I'm on my phone because my internet is being oddly slow. So as your super chats come in, I will type them down. I'll just type them down here as we do them. That's the way it will happen. So if you got a super chat question, something you'd like to ask me, send me a super chat in the second half of the show. Or no, send it to me now, and then I'll answer it in the second half of the show, or whenever you think of it. Anything you'd like me to talk about, I'll type it down, and I will type it down, and then in the second half of our show, I will answer it. That's the way we'll just do it tonight. And we're on my phone, and my phone is acting odd, and it won't turn portrait, and the regular internet is being weird, so I'm doing it from my phone, and it's going to be an interesting morning, but I am still here with all of you. Streaming with all of you is very, very important to me. It is what I love to do, so I'm going to keep doing it, even if the universe makes it a difficult thing to do. I'm going to keep doing these streams. Glad to be here. Glad we have an opportunity to chat and talk about things. And I've got my unnamed diet beverage. And it's rainy outside here in Brooklyn. But yeah, here we are. Here we are, everybody. So yeah, I wish you all the best, and let's have another chat. Keep those super chats rolling in. Oh, Gala says it looks good. Nice view. Gala likes it. So there you go. There you go. Cheers to you, Gala. I think Gala's out in Texas. Got a great family and doing great stuff. So anyhow, all right, I'll type that down, that first super chat down. Gala, it looks good. It looks good, Caleb. Nice view. There you go. And that's how I'll do it for the rest of the show. Since we're doing this on my phone, I will just type down any super chats that come in. That's the way we'll do it. So for those of you that have been following the news, I don't know if you've seen, But Joe Biden and Israel continue this claim that they are not the ones that blew up the hospital. All right. So in Gaza, there was a Baptist hospital, and it was a place that a lot of people were fleeing for shelter as the bombing of Gaza went on. And with a single airstrike, Israel destroyed the hospital, killed at least 500 people. Now, Israel is now claiming they didn't do it. At first, they claimed that it was justified because they claimed that Hamas was using the hospital for some of their activities or something. And then after that, they started claiming, well, no, they didn't do it. The Palestinians blew up their own hospital. Then they claimed that Iran made the Palestinians blow up the hospital. I mean, it's getting stupider by the minute. And everyone knows that Israel blew up this hospital. Well, Joe Biden went to Israel, and he said it must have been the other team. The other team, like it's sports, right? This is baseball, right? It's baseball, right? Why would the Palestinians bomb their own hospital? And it's not, this isn't a game. Like, these are people's lives. At least 500 civilians got their lives wiped out. And it's not a game, but that was how Joe Biden decided to frame it, as the other team did it. And, Biden, he said in his speech to the country on Thursday night, he said that it wasn't Israel. It wasn't Israel. That was his line. So now we have the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. The Russian foreign minister, he made a point of saying that the United States clearly knows who did it. And so if the United States has evidence that somebody else bombed this hospital, they should present it to the world. The amount of surveillance the United States engages in with its satellites, etc., that whole area was being monitored by the United States. The United States should know full well who did it. And if they have some evidence that it wasn't the Israeli government, they should present that to the world, and they clearly should. And that was a very astute observation, I think, by the Russian foreign minister, is that if they have some evidence that somebody else did it, the United States should present that to the world, because the amount of surveillance the United States has, etc. Does Israel fit Dutt's definition of fascism? Oh, that's an interesting question. This is from James Turner. Does Israel fit Dutt's definition of fascism? Question mark. That's a good question. But anyway, that's on the list. And that's how we're doing it today, just so folks know. I'm typing down people's super chat questions. We're on my phone. My phone is not cooperating and insisting that I go up and down, and the regular internet at my house, it's very slow. I can kind of see it. It's slow. It's working, but it's slow. But it's too slow to stream, which is very odd. So I'm like pulling it up on my screen right now, and it's just very, very slow, and it's too slow to stream. But I can do it on my phone. My phone seems to get enough signal that it can do it. So I'm doing it from a phone, and that's how we're doing things. It's Saturday, and I've got my unnamed diet beverage. We've got a CPI meeting coming up this afternoon to plan for our very, very important conference that's happening in Portland, Oregon. That's very, very exciting. I'm traveling next week. Monday night, I'm heading out of town. You all can probably guess where. But I'm not going to talk too much about the details of my trip. I guess maybe when I come back or whatever, we can talk about that. But yeah, I'm heading out of the country on Monday. Details to be shared with you all later. But it's just a short trip. I'll be back afterwards. And so that's happening. We're having a very important meeting this afternoon, 3 p.m., the Center for Political Innovation. We're talking about our Portland conference. And we got a lot of great things going on. Got a lot of very exciting things going on. We got a lot of stuff that's happening. And a lot of people, we had a planning meeting for the conference in Portland on Thursday night. And it was amazing. There were 23 people on there from different parts of the country who want to organize and build the Portland conference. And it was very, very exciting. People from Portland itself, people from Northern California, people from Seattle, people from different parts of the country, got to meet some new people, and we are pumped. We are very, very pumped about the Portland conference. It was a great meeting. I really wish you all could have been there. It was very, very exciting. And we're having just a chain of events that are happening. December 1st, we're going to give a platform to Jyoti Brar of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. And she'll be giving a talk at an event that we have in the Portland area, sponsored by the Center for Political Innovation and by the Party of Communists USA. It'll be a World Anti-Imperialist Platform event. That'll be happening. Then on December 2nd, we're going to be having the conference, and it's going to be massive. And Garland Nixon is going to be there, and Jyoti Brar is going to be there, and Scott Ritter is going to be there, and and it's going to be tremendous. We're having the actual conference on December 2nd, all day, mega anti-imperialist rally, busing people in. David Rovics is going to be performing his music. That's going to be great. Great speeches, great music, great performance. And I was on the phone with our president talking about the way the hall is going to be laid out, the images that we're going to have. It's going to be really, really spectacular on December 2nd. December 3rd, there'll be a special event that I will talk more about at some point in the future about different organizations that work with CPI. And it looks like during the following week, we're going to have a small rally in Portland to support the Uhuru movement. There'll be like a protest to support Uhuru. Then there'll also be a public speaking workshop that we're going to work with our different members and stuff, and work on public speaking, teach the art of public speaking. That's going to be important. And then from there, December 8th, 9th, and 10th, we are going to have a 3-day workshop, for friends and allies and, friends and allies of the Center for Political Innovation. We're going to have a 3-day educational workshop with people. And that is going to be absolutely tremendous. It's going to be great, which will, teach our ideology. We have these model classes that we give on the history of Marxism, Leninism, and anti-imperialism. So, yeah, you really ought to find a way to Portland in early December, right? Because you won't regret it. We are going to be doing some great stuff, and we're in real life community of people that are working together to spread anti-imperialism and promote our ideology, and we're doing it, right? And a lot of this social media stuff is just toxic. It is just designed to incite people against each other. People get rewarded for having fights, and whereas we're trying to build an in real life community of people who can depend on each other. People who can rely on each other. So a huge corporation like Walmart, Amazon, etc., put into public ownership. All right, I'll put it on the list. Yeah, that's how I'm doing it today. So you're on the list, but we're building a real community here. People who can rely on each other, people who can depend on each other. We're having in real life events. We're training people to do in real life outreach, to do real organizing, real rallies, real activities to promote the anti-imperialist causes. We're not just making a silly social media brand, right? We're not doing that. And that there's a lot of people that are doing silly social media brands. And it's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate that I see that so much, but it's happening, right? That in order to prevent you from joining a real community and engaging in real activism, and really confronting the power structure, really bonding with other people, they create just a corner of the internet for you to lurk on, right? And you can lurk on that corner of the internet, and you can just seethe in your own negativity. That's what a lot of this internet stuff is. It's just a place for you to seethe in your own negativity. And I would urge you, right, that so much of what we do in CPI is just focused on being positive. It is focusing on building real relationships and real bonds between other people. It is focused on getting real stuff done, engaging the masses of people, confronting and meeting people who would never go looking for this ideology, doing real outreach to real people. And that is so much of what we are focused on doing. Um, and so we're just in a different game. We're just in a different ballpark. And that I am now convinced, I didn't used to think this. And I mean, I still do think that there's a lot of people who just don't know any better. Okay. So I'm not talking about them, obviously. But I am convinced at this point that part of what the US ruling class has decided to do, part of their strategy for controlling dissent, is keeping people on the internet. They've blown up certain social media channels and certain social media characters that will keep people online and that will keep people online, isolated, and operating in a way that is intentionally offensive to the bulk of the population, and that not acting as political professionals and chronically online and just online and angry and pessimistic and negative. That's what I am convinced is happening. I am convinced that there is an effort to keep our communities and keep people who think in an anti-imperialist way, keep people who are angry at the U.S. status quo and opposing the wars, keep them just kind of isolated online. I believe that there is a definite effort on the part of the ruling class to keep dissident communities functioning in that manner, and that's how it looks to me. That's how it looks to me. We are not following that script. We're not following that playbook. We are building an in real life community, and because of that, people who don't understand that, or people who are just doing this online thing, are going to become even more hostile to us. And we just have to keep going. We just have to keep going. I wanted to read you all because I'm getting it from behind the phone here. My latest book is called Letter to Bob Avakian, and it's my letter to Bob Avakian, my critique of the Revolutionary Communist Party and their political line and all of that. Towards the end of it, I give this is the final section. This is chapter 19 of Letter to Bob Avakian, chapter 19. And I'm going to read you chapter 19. So, this is how I end the book Letter to Bob Avakian. As I conclude this letter, I must say I am nervous about publishing it. One of my frustrations with your organization over the years has been that you have this great desire to have people engage with Bob Avakian's work. However, your response to criticism of it is often not positive. If a review summarizes your work, even with a positive assessment, you often take issue with it being not a correct summary, and your supporters lash out. Furthermore, if a review criticizes your work, as I have just done, you may consider it harsh slander or the work of the enemy. I am not your enemy. For all the good you have done over the course of your life, I salute you. You are a big reason that Mumia Abu-Jamal is still alive. You were a major factor in opposing the U.S. invasion of Iraq, protecting civil liberties and free speech over the course of decades, and showing the American people very loudly that communism as a movement was and is alive and well in our country. I'm only 35 years old, and I have been organizing the Center for Political Innovation for just a few years, but I have already been subjected to just a fraction of the personal attacks, smearing, and government intimidation that you have faced. And I must admit that when I was a younger man, before I had the experiences that I have now, I was guilty of spreading gossip and rumors about you, speaking of you in negative and unfair terms, and otherwise disrespecting you in an unprincipled and dishonest way. And for that, I sincerely apologize. In this letter, I have tried to be as intellectually honest and fair as possible. I have tried to back up everything I have said with evidence, and every statement attributed to you with an actual quotation. I do not think I will change your mind, and I have not written this with such intentions. This is a public document for me to use your views and statements and contrast them with my own perspective. This is a polemic, a staple of the Marxist tradition, along the lines of anti-Düring, the poverty of philosophy, the critique of the Goethe program, left-wing communism, and similar works. If you and your organization takes great offense to what I have written or finds it highly objectionable, or if you find it to be an honest contrasting of worldviews, I would be deeply honored to see a response in print. It would be the highest level compliment to have this text acknowledged by yourself and your organization. I honestly doubt that you will respond to what is written above, but it would be deeply appreciated and would contribute to the kind of lively atmosphere of debate and discussion that your new synthesis claims to promote. I can assure you that this piece is not the work of some kind of COINTELPRO style operation, and it is not intended to stir up more controversy or drama. I wrote this work hoping that the audience would come away with it with an accurate assessment of our very different interpretations of the same overall worldview. The struggle to build a stateless, classless world without inequality, the great project of communism. I want to end with one final point. Years ago, I was getting involved in the Workers' World Party. I showed your DVD, Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, What It's All About, to an elderly comrade. This woman had parents who had been in the Communist Party USA during the 1930s. She had attended young pioneer summer camps and grown up in Brooklyn. She had been a founding member of the Workers' World Party, having been in Sam Marcy's faction of the Socialist Workers' Party prior to that. She watched you begin by singing Bob Dylan's lyrics about selling postcards of the hanging and go on to describe the ugliness of lynching, then compare it to the horrific details of police brutality, and then from there emphasize that revolution is the solution. And after watching you speak for several hours, she gave me her criticism as a longtime communist. She said, "He's only telling half the story." She asked why you did not tell of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry or Nat Turner's slave revolt. She asked why you did not speak of the Deacons for Defense or the African Blood Brotherhood or the interracial sharecroppers unions that the Communist Party built throughout the Jim Crow South, bringing black and white workers together to oppose the capitalist system. Where does he think this revolution is going to come from? She asked. This moment was a huge one in my political education, which I often referred back to years later. To this woman who had spent her life in the communist movement, from her childhood in the 1930s up to her death in 2014, you came across as a utopian socialist. You did not place your revolution in the context of the working class movement and the anti-racist struggles and the anti-war protests of the past. You did not insert yourself into the ongoing battles taking place in the U.S. society, and present socialism and revolution as the victory of all the progressive forces that have existed before. You presented socialism and communism almost like they were a magical formula that you came into town selling one day to solve all problems. In doing so, you write yourself out of American history. You almost surrender the entire context of U.S. society to other forces. Karl Marx did not do this when Lincoln battled the slaveholders. Marx understood that in order to Marx understood that in order for the communist movement to be relevant, it had to attach itself to the progressive struggles of the abolitionists, the slave revolutionaries, the labor movement, and even the industrial capitalists in their efforts to defeat the slaveholders in the South. Joseph Wedemeyer and August Willich became important leaders of the Union Army. Marx wrote for the New York Tribune, the Republican Party-aligned newspaper of New York City, edited by Horace Greeley. The International Working Men's Association organized workers in Britain to hold mass rallies supporting Lincoln and to refuse to work with cotton imported from the United States and picked by slaves. If you understand that it is necessary to attach yourself to certain forces and make strategic alliances in divisions in the ruling class, why does it not follow that you should present your movement as a continuation and concentration of progressive strands and forces of resistance that already exist in U.S. society? Marxism does not teach that the revolution comes from thin air, but that it comes from material contradictions and existing social forces. Why is attaching your organization and its legacy to those forces not part of how you present communism? Why does your communism seem to be alien, disconnected, seem to be an alien, disconnected force, a kind of magical solution? The revolution I want to build is a continuation of the progressive struggles that have taken place on this soil for hundreds of years. It is the culmination of the labor movement. It is the struggle for peace, the struggle for equal rights and liberty. It is the construction of an anti-monopoly coalition to defeat the imperialists and rebuild the United States as a society where the banks and factories and centers of economic power work in the interests of society overall, not the profits of a very wealthy few. I will never forget the day when I was 15 years old and I got to spend the afternoon at a bookstore run by your cadre. My mother told me not to leave the store under any circumstances. But after our discussion of Bush ended, the comrades said it was time to go out and sell the paper. They handed me a stack of newspapers. I looked on in horror, thinking, you have got to be kidding me. The idea of walking up to strangers, people I did not know, and asking them to pay actual money for a newspaper about communism seemed outrageous. I was shy, I was nervous, but the comrades said, come on, we do it all the time. And I went out onto the streets of the Coventry neighborhood in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and I sold communist newspapers. The day saved my life. It was my first step out of the shell of isolation and depression I had trapped myself in. It was my first step toward discovering my own identity and breaking away from the roles and labels my family had placed on me. It was my first step toward having real friends and knowing what it meant to be part of a real group of dedicated people struggling for a cause. The day I joined a movement, that day I joined a movement. I had said I believed in communism before that. I had argued about it on the internet and debated people in my school, but I had never really done anything about it. For too many young people I meet now, communism is just an internet hobby, a commodified identity, as my friend filmmaker Peter Coffin describes it. Communism is a way to complain about the world and put a label on yourself. Communism is a fantasy for people who feel alienated from the society that they live in. But the day I sold your newspaper with a team of young cadres, I joined a movement. That was the day I started to have self-esteem and be proud of who I was as a communist. That was the day I began to perfect my ability to interact with people. That was a pivotal day in the history of my life. That was the day I took my first steps toward New York City, Iran, Russia, and Venezuela. That was the day the person I have become today, as much as you may disapprove, was born. For this, I am eternally grateful to you. It has taken me years to realize what you did for me. It has also taken me years to see that my generation and the generations younger than me are full of young people who have the same hopelessness, the same pessimism, the same lack of self-esteem and lack of self-empowerment that I had. Millions of young Americans desperately need a movement, just like I did. and I intend to give it to them. I intend to save their lives just as you saved mine. I intend to keep the flame of revolution burning, even if I understand it far differently than you. With sincerity and honesty, Caleb T. Maupin, ideological leader of the Center for Political Innovation. And that's how I ended my letter to Bob Avakian. And I ended it by pointing to the importance of building a movement, why building a movement is important. As you can see, we included some pictures there, right, at the end, right? We have, the CPI conference, the crowds of people. We have our banner, peace with Russia, peace with China, no police state, no World War III, and then I also included on the back page, this is us doing the Pledge of Unity at one of our conferences, right? The Center for Political Innovation continues to hold rallies around the country working to build a community of anti-imperialists, and I have the people taking our anti-imperialist pledge. That's how I ended the book. So this book is important because, Bob Avakian, the Revolutionary Communist Party, as much as I feel like they really lost their way, especially in the late 70s, what they were trying to do with the new communist movement, what they were trying to do is what we're trying to do. We're trying to go out of the movement to the masses. We're trying to build a base among the population. We are trying to leave the counterculture hippie stuff behind, and we're trying to actually organize real Americans in real communities to stand in solidarity with the oppressed countries around the world and fight for real socialism against the monopolies, against the corporations and the big bankers that dominate the United States. That's what we're doing. And I want to let you know, so for those of you, wow, now I have to move this again. Hold on, gonna move this again, right? So for those of you who've been following the work of the Center for Political Innovation, hold on. I wanted to update you all on, what's going on these days. I mean, right now our focus is on our conference, but I got a couple other things to share with you. So for those of you who are familiar with our work, right, we are a socialist education organization. That's mainly what we do. We're a socialist education project, the Center for Political Innovation. And for those of you who are familiar with our work, you'll know right now we're focused on the Portland conference and the couple weeks of activity that we have planned in early December in Portland, Oregon. We're doing an educational weekend retreat. We got a big national conference with some big names. We're going to have some little rallies around Portland. We're planning a big week of just kind of solidifying our community. But for those of you who are familiar with our work, you'll know about the textbook, right? We have a textbook called We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Education Manual, right? And this is our textbook that we use for classes. This is basically the book that accompanies the Saxton Lectures, right? I gave a series of talks called the Saxton Lectures, and then we've used those as model classes for the courses that we've done around the country, right? The Saxton Lectures, right? And this is the book that goes along with the Saxton Lectures. It's called the manual, the educational manual. Right now, I am in the process. I mean, it's not going to be immediate, right? And here's a link to the Saxton Lectures. It looks like the internet on my computer is being very slow, but it did finally pull up the Saxton Lectures. So I'll give you a link. If you want like an introduction to Marxism and anti-imperialism and the city-building tendency and what we draw from the Marxist-Leninist, movement and communism, but how we've also updated it and applied it to U.S. circumstances, the Saxton Lectures are what you should watch. So I'll just drop the link here in the chat on the computer. I don't know why my home internet is being so slow, but yeah, I'm going to drop the link here in the chat, the Saxton Lectures. I hope it came through. So we've got the Saxton Lectures, right? This book, We Are City Builders. This is the book that kind of goes along with the Saxton Lectures, right? And it kind of lays out our theory. I mean, we call ourselves the city building tendency. That's what we call ourselves, right? That we view communism and Marxism as part of a much broader current in global history, with Socrates, with Jesus Christ, with with the abolitionists, and with many forces throughout human history, the city building tendency. And this book kind of explains our perspective, right? And a lot of the texts in here are not written by me. The opening text is written by me. It's an essay that I wrote. It's about 100 pages long, called City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. But then, in addition to that, then we have a bunch of other pieces, right? We have essays by Mao, essays by Marx, by Lenin. We have stuff by Henry Wallace, and Albert Einstein, Edward Bellamy, etc. And we have just a number of like socialist educational pieces, and every section has discussion questions at the end. Because it's designed to, have classes. It's like a textbook for people to have classes. Well, this is volume 1. This is the first textbook. And really, this is not just a book. This isn't just something for you to read. When you buy this, right, it's designed, you can then give classes on it. You can invite your friends on Zoom or invite your friends over to your house and read a section and then discuss it. That's what it's designed to do, right? So this is a mechanism through which you can teach our ideology. Anyway, I'm telling you all of that to make a point, which is that in the lead up to our conference that's happening in Portland, and afterwards especially, I am working on another textbook, a second volume. That's the first textbook. That's the introduction to CPI, right? When you want to know what CPI is all about, We Are City Builders Manual, the Saxton Lectures, that's volume 1. And you will that's 101. That's the basics about what the city building tendency is about. But I am now composing a follow-up volume, right? I am composing a follow-up volume, a follow-up book that will be about our organizational heritage. And I will talk about the Communist Party of the 1930s and William Z. Foster. And I will talk about the Marcyite tendency, where they came from, their flaws, their errors, etc. I will talk about the new communist movement of the 1970s. I will talk about the divisions in the ruling class, and I talk about that a lot, the Yankee and Cowboy War, and how that gives us orientation for our time. And I have to talk about Lynn Marcus and Lyndon LaRouche and where they came from and why they are what they are, and the divisions in the ruling class that kind of gave birth to that development. I have to talk about that, and then okay. How would you describe economics? And this is from Tuno. Okay. Wrote it down. That's how I have to do it, because for some reason my internet is being very slow. I can barely get it to play here on the screen, right? I mean, look at this. Look at this. It's just like this is how bad my internet is, right? That's the screen. Can you believe this? It's just like sitting there. I mean, it's really slow, and it's working. That's the thing. I wondered, is my internet off? Did I forget to pay the bill? No, my internet's working. It's just being very, very slow, and I don't know why that's happening. So I'm streaming on my phone, and then my phone won't let me turn sideways, so here we are. But anyway, I'm typing down the questions as they come in. That's what I'm doing. I'm typing down the questions. So you got something you want me to talk about, just do what Tuna has done. We got 4 super chats that have come in so far, and that's, we're going to answer those in the second half of our program. But there you go. Anyhow, so this new volume I'm working on will be about our organizational history, and just like the one, just like We Are City Builders, it's going to have original texts in it, from the writers that I cite, and different thinkers, etc. That's the idea, is that it will be a kind of an organizational. It'll be like the next level, the second level. In CPI education. So the Saxton Lectures will be the first the Saxton Lectures and We Are City Builders, that's the introduction course. And then we're going to have the second course, the second level of classes, which will be accompanied by our second level manual, our second level book. So there you go. There you go. That's kind of what I've got in the works. So just wanted to share that with all of you about how we're doing that. So, all right, this is, so why don't we do the roll call, names and locations, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I'll answer the super chats. And then I will probably be, I'm planning to stream again tonight. I just hope I can do it from my computer. I hope I don't have to do it on my phone here because my internet is being so weird. So names and locations, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you, names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We got Johnny from Eastern Canada, Johnny Yuma, Kieran from San Diego, shout out to you, Kieran. Alberto from Guatemala. Welcome, Alberto. Good to have you. A lot going on in Guatemala these days. They were really good, those Saxton Lectures. Meredith and Quinn from Washington State. Jamie from St. Paul. Patch in Arizona. Christopher from Texas. Jacob in Monroe, Louisiana. Welcome, Jacob. Glad to have you. Glad to have you. Mike from Oakland. Welcome, Mike. Simon from Oslo. Welcome, Simon. Brad in Cleveland. Welcome, Brad. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, I see some new faces today. That's great. Glad to have you. Glad to have some new people here. Chester from England is with us. Welcome, Chester. Chester from England. We got Chris in Salt Lake City. Welcome, Chris. Good to have you. Good to have you. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Glad to have you, Chris. Names and locations. Who else is with us this early afternoon stream? Let's see if I can do that. Right? Who else? Names and locations. We got Phil Sang in Miami, Loxheath in the United Kingdom. Very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Who is with us this afternoon, rather? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. All right. St. David's, Bermuda is with us. Restless Native. Okay. Very good. Very, very good. All right. Well, I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. If people have more super chat questions, by all means, send them in. I'll just type them as they come in. So Gala, she said, it looks good, Caleb. Nice view. And like I said, this is a weird circumstance. My internet is being slow. So I'm doing it on my phone. My phone won't turn properly, so I'm doing it, I'm doing it horizontally, or what do they call this, vertically rather than horizontally. I'm doing it portrait rather than landscape, but I'm still streaming. That's the important thing. I haven't silenced myself. I haven't shut myself down. I haven't surrendered. I've kept going. I've got plenty to say that the world needs to hear. Imperialism, the system, is destroying people's lives all over the world. We must oppose the imperialists. So I keep streaming. That's the important thing. You don't surrender. So thank you, Gala, for being here with us. And it is very appreciated that you're here. And thank you to everyone who remains loyal to this community. And I got to say this, right? I got to say this. If you are part of the online world, right? Which, I mean, we don't want to be online. We want to be in real life. We want to build an in real life movement. But unfortunately, people that, you have to have one foot, right? You're all online watching me now. One thing about the online world, as I've mentioned many times, is you're incentivized to fight with people, to disagree with people, because that gets you attention. However, I will add that even in the online world, people notice. People notice that, right? And if you are a member of a community, and you're a loyal member of the community, and then something goes wrong, and then you turn against them and start attacking them, people will notice that. People will remember that. and people are going to be unlikely to work with you in the future. And people don't seem to understand that if you display to the world that you're a traitor, if you display to the world that you will turn on a dime, you'll turn on your friends, people will notice that. Maybe they won't notice it at first, but they'll notice it over time. And there are certain people that go from community to community to community, and somebody does something they don't like, and they just have a tantrum, and they go in one direction, and everyone notices that. And those people become untrustworthy, and other people are less likely to promote them in the future. People are less likely to work with them in the future, because they don't know if they're going to turn on them, right? And I think about that with all the people who have turned on me. I haven't betrayed my friends. I people are good to me. Even if there's some disagreement, I tend to say, okay, we might disagree about that, but I tend to hold on to the relationship because I'm a loyal person, because I'm serious about building something. But there's other people that are online, and it's like, oh, you disagreed with me about one thing? Well, fuck you. And they lose their minds. And then they wonder why they have no friends. And then they wonder why no one's promoting them. And then they wonder why are people not pumping me and promoting me? Well, how many people have you turned on in the past year? How many people used to be supported by your community, and then you got mad at them over some little disagreement and denounced them on the web and sent all your friends to attack them? And then you wonder why you don't have any friends left. People notice this, right? People don't want to go through the process of having someone who they thought was their friend turn into their enemy. It's not a friendly process. It's not a friendly experience. I'm a loyal person, right? I try my hardest to hold on to relationships, to maintain alliances, even when there's disagreements. There was a young guy who was part of the CPI community. He hadn't joined, but he was kind of a friend, but he was pro-Israel. And I sent him a message. I don't know if he got it. And I said, look, we don't agree about Israel and Palestine, but I think deep down you're a good person. And I hope that in the future we can continue to work together to some degree or other, even though you have this strong point of disagreement. I am 100% on the Palestinian side, 100% of the Palestinian side. But, so there you go. That's a good question. This is from Simon. Were there any of the so-called New York intellectuals that did not sell out? We'll answer that. So that's an important thing. I stand by my friends, right? And I do, right? And I think about even some of the relationships I'm bitter about. I tried to leave the Workers' World Party on good terms. I was convinced that I could just kind of step out of membership and be kind of a reporter, a journalist who was, associated with the party in the past, but was doing different things, and I could remain friendly. But they were determined to burn the bridge. But I tried to hold on to it. I stand by my friends. I am a loyal person, right? I am not one of these people, because there are just so many of them, who they're friends one day with somebody, they're allies with somebody in the media world, the social media world, and then things go awry. Right? And then one thing happens, and then all of a sudden they're online going, I denounce you. I don't do that. Right? If someone is friendly to me, if somebody is, willing to engage with me to some degree or other, even if it gets to the point that we disagree with each other on vital issues or whatever, I tend to stand by my friends. And people notice that. And that's why I'm still here, despite everything that's been thrown at me. I'm still here because people have noticed that. And then there are a lot of people that, have criticisms of me or disagreements, but they've noticed that I haven't, I don't come swinging, and they see that I'm in the game for real. I'm in the game for real. I'm in this for the long haul, right? I'm not planning to do something else, right? I'm not planning to, this is where I am. And because of that, they see that. And that's why so many people are still friendly to me, despite everything that's happened, because I'm still friendly with a lot of people, despite the disagreements that we might have. And that is an important thing to remember. And don't you forget that, right? That if you're in this for real, you maintain alliances and you maintain friendships. You don't gain anything in the real world by having enemies. You gain things in the real world by having friends, right? The internet, of course, is a different story. The internet is a very, very different story. But there you go. All right. So the next super chat question I've got here, James Turner, he asked me, does Israel fit Arpalm Dutt's definition of fascism? I would argue no, it doesn't. That doesn't mean that Israel isn't a brutal colonial settler state that brutalizes and murders Palestinians. But my understanding of fascism, as Dutt lays it out, is that fascism is not something that happens in the third world. Fascism is something that happens in the first world. And it is first world Western capitalist societies that are liberal, democratic, open societies collapsing in on themselves and becoming authoritarian societies by and implementing dramatic economic measures in order to carry out degrowth economics to save capitalism, right? And that is what Dutt lays out in the book, that it is when a liberal Western capitalist imperialist country collapses into illiberalism and starts dramatically implementing policies in order to carry out degrowth. Whereas Israel, it was people from the first world, people from Brooklyn, New York, people from London, people from various parts of Europe who were oppressed or discriminated against as Jews, decided to make a case to the British Empire that they could be effective allies in the Middle East and that they could be settlers in the Middle East, and that would be useful to have them in the Middle East to fight for U.S. interests. And British interests. So the Balfour Declaration was created, and Israel was created as an outpost of Western colonialism and Western capitalism in the Middle East region at a time that Arab nationalism and Arab anti-imperialism was rising. You have to remember that, especially after the Second World War, you had a rise of anti-colonial sentiments all over the world, and the Middle East was part of that. And shortly after the creation of Israel, you had the rise of Abdel Nasser, the Arab socialist in Egypt, who raised Egypt up, who used the military to raise the people of Egypt up and built factories and all of that. And then later you had the rise of Ba'athist Arab socialism, and that you had a rise of anti-colonialism all over the Arab world. And Israel was set up as an outpost of Western capitalism and Western imperialism to try and hold that back. And Israel is it's a country where only Israeli citizens have the power, and that the Palestinians, the bulk of the Palestinians who lived there before, don't have citizenship, and they are they're trapped in an open air prison in Gaza. They're occupied on the West Bank, and that is the way they live. That is the conditions that they live in. And it's not fascism in the sense that Nazi Germany was fascism, or fascist Italy or Spain. It's not fascism in that sense. It is a Western-backed apartheid state, right? That's what it is. It's a Western-backed apartheid state. And it's an outpost of Western imperialism and colonialism, but it's not degrowth economics. And actually, what's weird is that Netanyahu and his faction probably are closer to the lower levels of capital in the West that do believe in economic growth. And part of the fight, it shows how there's nuance in all things. Part of the fight is that Netanyahu wants to expand Israel's economy. He wants to expand the settlement activity and the oppression of the Palestinians. And the Western capitalist economy overall doesn't want that. And so Netanyahu, with his kind of settler racist populism, he has certain desires and interests that put him at odds with the overall interests of Western capitalism and imperialism. And that was why there was kind of a color revolution. That's why he's trying to fight with the judiciary. That's why all of that is happening. You have to remember. So it's complicated. There are nuance in all things, but in terms of fascism in the classical way that we understand fascism in the West, and the classical Marxist definition that comes from Dutt, that we use at the Center for Political Innovation, that has been completely lost by the Western left, who just think fascism is when you're racist or fascism when you're mean. No, fascism has a scientific, economic, Marxist definition. That definition that has been lost by the mainstream left that we uphold, Israel just doesn't fit it. Israel is a colonial project. So there you go. All right. All right. Now, the next question comes from Simon. Should a huge corporation like Amazon or Walmart be put under public ownership in socialism? And should compensation be paid? I would argue that absolutely it should be put under public ownership in a socialist society. Ideally, these mega corporations, Walmart, Amazon, General Electric, these huge multinational corporations that are a big part of the U.S. economy that operate all over the globe. That I would argue that yes, they should be operated in the interest of society overall. Now, we have learned from China that and other socialist societies, but China most especially, that there can be a role for a private corporation of some sorts in a socialist society, right? That a huge private corporation that is, perhaps operated like a cooperative that is subsidized and guided by the state can have an important role in a socialist society, like Huawei Technologies. Huawei Technologies is a private cooperative under Chinese law. However, it doesn't operate according to the market logic. Huawei tends to produce things because the Chinese government deems it necessary. The Chinese government kind of directs its activities and subsidizes its activities. But there are private investors who make profit. The employees also get a share of the profit. It's a Harvard Business Review called it an example of profit sharing working, but this is a private corporation. So, there is room for private corporations to some degree in a socialist society. But they don't function according to market logic. They are controlled by the state, right? And they function according to a plan that is in the interest of the population overall. That's important. And a lot of times they practice profit sharing or cooperative aspects, right? Like Huawei does. I mean, there's many examples of this, right? So, but ultimately, I think the process of creating socialism in the United States does mean that Amazon, Walmart, General Electric, the big banks, the big oil companies become public property. That is my understanding. But that a socialist society might then create private corporations or private cooperative enterprises or private entities for its own needs that could bring in foreign investors, that could facilitate economic growth, facilitate innovation. Look, I am of the opinion that the government shouldn't be running hotels. The government shouldn't be running restaurants. The government shouldn't be running, companies that design clothing, companies that design new children's toys for the things that make life pleasurable: hospitality, entertainment, luxury. For those kind of things, you do need market incentive. You do need people to be able to vote with their dollars about which is better, et cetera, right? But profits shouldn't be in command. That's the point. The point that Marx is making is that while there might be room for market incentive for luxury goods, et cetera, profits shouldn't dictate the overall production. And that, in a steel mill, right? There's no reason you need the market incentive in the steel mill. You produce this much steel or you don't, right? I mean, in the Soviet Union, the steel mills ran very, very well. The government said, we need this much steel, and they made it. All right, we need this much steel, and we need it. And the workers in the steel mill were salaried employees, and they got paid for many hours they put in, and they went in and they made the steel. Like the state ordered the steel, and they got it. It's perfect. For a heavy industry, for oil refining, for power plants, for hospitals, for things where it's not about pleasing people. It's just about getting a socially necessary activity carried out. State-run central planning works perfectly fine, right? And in the agricultural sector, state farms, they had state farms in the USSR. It was mainly collective farms. They also had state farms. That in the heavy industry sectors, in energy and your commanding heights of the economy, having the state dictate what goes on works very, very well. It is in the luxury and consumer goods, and people, the Soviet Union had very big problems in that area, very, very big problems in that area in the final years, and that some market incentive was needed, right? And that was how the West was able to kind of leverage it. But China, you'll notice, was able to adopt a system whereas consumer goods and things like that could be private, and they have actually been able to flourish. And I think that that's what we've learned, that the Stalin model of socialism is very effective in industrializing a country, wiping out illiteracy, building power plants, paving the roads, doing like basic industrialization of a country. However, after you get over that first hurdle of industrialization, after the population has been mobilized to build the country up, and after the country has running water and electricity and universal literacy and education, then it starts to stagnate. And I think we saw that in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe in the 70s and 80s. And that's what led to the kind of confusion that laid the basis for the political defeat that was carried out and the overthrow of the Soviet Union, is that they needed to adjust their socialist system. And that is what I maintain. So that is my understanding. And I come at it, that modern socialism looks like China, looks like Vietnam, looks like Nicaragua. That system is the modern 21st century socialist model. That's what Venezuela has, more or less. That's what Iran has, more or less. And I guess that'll bring me to the next super chat question. And this is from Tunu. Said, how can you describe Iran's economic system to someone who only knows capitalism and socialism? Well, I would say look at where socialism is today, right? Because Iran does not have the Soviet style system, right? And no one pretends it does. And Iran is not a Marxist-Leninist country. They don't believe in Marxism-Leninism in Iran. They are very much against Marxism. They are a religious government. It's Islamic, the Islamic Republic, not capitalism, but Islam, neither East nor West, war of poverty against wealth. That is the basis of the way they view things, right? It is the Islamic revolutionary tradition. And there's a huge private sector in Iran. A lot of private hotels, a lot of private restaurants, a lot of private companies that make clothing, a lot of private companies that sell goods. I mean, there's a lot of private sector in Iran. What I would tell people to understand is that the Soviet-style system doesn't exist anywhere in the world today. The socialist and communist countries don't practice the Soviet-style system anymore either, right? China doesn't operate that way. Venezuela, doesn't operate that. Cuba is having more of a private sector, and that the way that Iran's economy is modeled is very similar to what I call 21st century socialism, right? It's very similar to what they have in Vietnam, what they have in China, what they have in Nicaragua, what they have in Venezuela. It's very similar to that system. So if you can look at Iran that way, and that there are certain aspects of Iran that are very similar to that system, in that in Iran, the biggest economic entity in the country is what's called the Revolutionary Guards, right? The Islamic Revolutionary Guards are the biggest part of the Iranian economy. They are the biggest part. And the Revolutionary Guards, they are not a market entity. They are rather a revolutionary anti-imperialist military organization that was formed during the revolution that is loyal only to the supreme leader. They're not even loyal to the elected government. And they are just this activist revolutionary military group. And they are the biggest economic entity in the country. They have the most property, right? They own the most land. They own the most factories, and that then there's a lot of private companies that they own or that they facilitate and they set up. And the Revolutionary Guard, being the biggest economic entity in the country, that doesn't fit capitalism, right? Meanwhile, in addition to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard being the biggest economic entity, you have a very large state sector. Iran has, state steel companies. It has state power plants. It has a state Ministry of Health that provides free healthcare. It also has private hospitals, though, that are much more luxurious for wealthy people. But then they have a regular state Ministry of Health. Iran, it has largely a state-controlled economy, and it's a state that came out of a revolutionary anti-imperialist movement, right? The movement, to overthrow the Shah, who was backed by the United States. And then that state has these entities they call Basij councils. Basij means the mobilized oppressed, and that the Basij, or the mobilized oppressed, those are the community level organizations that were created to support Khomeini in the revolution. Every neighborhood has its local Basij council, and those are the local mobilized oppressed, they're called, and it's the local people that believe in Khomeini and his revolution and its principles, and they're volunteers. A lot of them don't get paid to do what they do. And they go around the neighborhood trying to make sure that the neighborhood is in line with the revolutionary principles. And that, in some areas in Iran, women don't have to wear headscarves. If they do, it's like a very, very limited headscarf because that local basij is more liberal. Whereas in the areas that are very, very conservative and like the more working class neighborhoods in the cities or in the rural areas, the basij is very, very, very Khomeiniist, very hardline. They will enforce that the women, wear, headscarves completely covered up, in a way, right? And that is a difference in Iran, right? But those Basij councils, they function almost like, Soviets. Or in Cuba, they have committees to defend the revolution. In Venezuela, they have Bolivarian circles. I'm glad Jeff Young likes my answer there. But, and shout out to Jeff Young out there in Kentucky. But yeah, I mean, it's, I would say that Iran's economic and political system is similar to the economic political system that we see in Venezuela, that we see in Cuba, that we see in China and Vietnam. It's not 21st century, or it's not 20th century socialism. It's not the old Stalin way of doing things. It's not the old Soviet way of doing things. But that system doesn't exist anywhere in the world, and it's not coming back. Right? That system was necessary, and it had great achievements, and I will defend that system's achievements to the end. I will never denounce that system or say it didn't work or join the chorus of lies against that system. I will hail the achievements of the Soviet Union, absolutely. And I will hail the achievements of Mao in China, and I will hail the achievements of Cuba and Libya and all the countries that in the 20th century adopted socialism and communism as a way of raising their people up out of poverty. I will not ever join the chorus saying that it failed or it didn't work, because it did. It had great successes. But I will also admit that it had its limitations in certain economic areas, and that in our time, anti-imperialism and socialism has changed. The other thing that you need to understand, and this is something that is very hard for a lot of people to recognize, is that anti-imperialism and socialism are synonymous. Okay? And let me repeat this. Anti-imperialism and socialism are more or less synonymous. Okay? And people don't quite understand that, but we just need to come to terms with that. When Lenin wrote his book, Imperialism, the Higher Stage of Capitalism, he was describing how Western capitalism had moved into this monopolistic stage where the for-profit corporations, the banks and the oil companies and the big mega corporations of the West were spreading their tentacles all over the world, holding back development and trying to make profits. And in that text, Lenin said that the fight is basically going to be between that Western imperialist apparatus and the people of the country, the people of the world trying to break free. And that when people break free, they're going to have to be socialists because the Western capitalists are going to be too strong, and the nationalist bourgeoisie, the wealthy capitalists of the third world that are anti-imperialist, are going to be too weak to fight the imperialists on their own. They're going to need the working class to back them up. I think Che Guevara talked about this. And so anti-imperialism is going to have to be socialist, and socialism is going to be anti-imperialism, right? Meanwhile, Lenin also points out in that book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, that in the West, social democracy, right, reformist socialism, advocacy of the welfare state, is not really revolutionary. It's just a mechanism for stabilizing the Western capitalist system. Because the imperialists want to conquer the entire world, they need to have peace at home. So if they give people some health care, some jobs, and that buys their loyalty to empire, they can do that. So social democracy is not anti-imperialist. It supports imperialism. It just wants the imperialists to give a bigger share, or a fair share to some people, or provide services. It's basically just advocating that imperialism function in a more effective manner. And that social democracy that's not anti-imperialist is not socialism. Meanwhile, people around the third world who might not call themselves socialists, right, might reject socialism. If they fight the imperialists, after a while they're going to realize that they need to have a centrally planned economy. They need to mobilize the working class to defend their system, right? The Iranian Islamic Revolution, they did not want to create a socialist system, but they more or less have. Right? And they don't call it that. They say it's neither capitalist or socialism. It's not capitalism but Islam. But basically, they've more or less set up a non-capitalist society. You can call it whatever you want, right? But they've been forced to do that because they're up against the imperialists. right? So anti-imperialism is socialism, and if it's not anti-imperialist, it's not socialism. And that everyone who's anti-imperialist, more or less, is forced to become socialistic, and that forms of socialism, I put in quotes, in the West that are not anti-imperialist are not really socialism, because they're just a mechanism for trying to stabilize Western society, right? That social imperialism, the social democrats, social reformism is just a mechanism, and it's mainly used by the ultra rich and the wealthiest imperialists in the West to try and stabilize their system and make it work more effectively. And that is what it really gets down to. In our time, if you're an anti-imperialist, you're a socialist, and if you're not anti-imperialist, you're not a socialist. And it kind of shows that words and labels, semantics, don't matter that much. Okay, because there's plenty of people in the developing world who are fighting the imperialists who don't think they're socialists, and they more or less are, whether they want to admit it or not. And then there are many people in the West who go around saying that they believe in socialism, talk about socialism, they advocate socialism, they quote Marx and all that, but they're not, because they're not against the main apparatus of Western capitalism that exists, imperialism, the global monopoly system that's trying to lead us into war with Russia. They're not against that. Right? They're not challenging it in any way. They're just talking about worker cooperatives, or they want the trade unions to have better representation, or they want some free health care or whatever. But if they're not up against the imperialists, they're not really socialists. And so this is what you need to understand, that it's imperialism versus anti-imperialism in the world. And that's really what it gets down to. And that other questions are secondary. Right? Among the anti-imperialist camp, there's probably great disagreement and debate about how they should build their revolutionary anti-imperialist movement. There's probably disagreement, but that's secondary, right? And among the pro-imperialist camp, right, there are some who want a bigger welfare state. There are some who want a smaller welfare state. There are some who, and again, that's secondary. Are you for the imperialists? Or are you against them? That's what everything is about in our time. Are you for the imperialists, or are you against the imperialists? That is the decisive question in the world. There is a dying system that dominates the planet, centered around Wall Street banks and monopolies and corporations that are trying to hold back economic growth around the world so that they can stay at the top of the pyramid. And they are trying to foment wars, etc., in order to stay at the top, right? And the question is, are you for that system, or are you against that system? And everything else is secondary, right? And that's what you need to understand. And I hope that I hope you're asking how to explain Iran to somebody. There you go. Where do Iranian exiles stand on Palestine? Very good question. Why? So that's social democratic parties refuse to join communists against fascism in Europe. All right. That's why social democratic parties All right. I will answer these questions in the order that they came in. So next, Simon says, were there any of the New York intellectuals that did not sell out? Well, okay, so what does sell out mean? I have the book here, The New York Intellectuals by Alan Wald, which is a good book. Let me see where I put it, right? It's The New York Intellectuals by Alan Wald. It's about the New York City. Yeah, here it is. All right. Got to keep track of my bookshelf. But The New York Intellectuals by Alan Wald, right? This is a history of the anti-Stalinist left, many of whum became neoconservatives, etc., right? And if you read about them, right, you're asking me, did any of them not sell out? I mean, that's hard to answer. Did the Soviet? Realize. Yeah. The thing is, you're asking me, did any of them not sell out? What does that mean? They were all kind of sellouts, right? The book is called The New York Intellectuals, The Rise and Decline of the Anti-Stalinist Left from the 1930s to the 1980s, right? And they were all kind of sellouts to begin with because they were all against the Soviet Union, right? There was a revolution that happened, the Russian Revolution, that they had all initially supported, and then all of the New York intellectuals, all of them, the reason that they existed was that they broke with the country that had the revolution that they originally supported. So the foundation of being one of the New York intellectuals was that you were a sellout. But were there any of them that remained left wing? Right? Yeah, yeah, there were. There were a number of them that continued calling themselves socialists. Irving Howe was one of the most famous. Irving Howe, he continued to call himself a socialist to the end. He was a Trotskyist. He was a follower of Max Shachtman. He eventually got kicked out of the Shachtmanite organization because he wrote that he was a partisan of the West in the Cold War, and the Shachtmanites at first maintained they were on neither side. They were neither for the West nor the East. They were for the working class, the third camp. And Irving Howe, I believe he wrote an article or something where he said basically more or less, no, we're on the pro-imperialist side. We're partisans of the West. We stand for the Western freedoms. They kicked him out, but then they all later came to that conclusion, and he became kind of the intellectual godfather of Democratic Socialists of America. Now, Max Shachtman, and then the guy named Michael Harrington, who's not considered a New York intellectual because he was a generation behind. He was a young guy. He was much younger, but there was a guy named Michael Harrington. Michael Harrington, Max Shachtman, and Irving Howe, they laid the basis for what is now called Democratic Socialists of America, right? And Max Shachtman and Irving Howe were New York intellectuals. They had a falling out because Irving Howe went the same route that Shachtman went, which was full pro-imperialist, but Irving Howe went that route sooner. And Irving Howe, I mean, he called himself a socialist to the end. I mean, he was a DSA guy, founder of DSA. So in that sense, he didn't sell out. He didn't become a conservative. And then, I mean, I don't know. This book also talks about James Cannon. He considers James Cannon a New York intellectual. Well, James Cannon, he was a big trot. He was a Trotskyite to the end, and he wrote the book denouncing, the bulk of the people called New York intellectuals. He wrote the book, The Struggle for a Proletarian Party, which has all kinds of digs at the New York City intellectual circles that gave birth to neoconservatism. And I quote that book, The Struggle for a Proletarian Party. I quote that book a lot because there's a lot of insights in there into kind of the difference between the liberal mindset and the illiberal mindset. That basically communism as a movement was an illiberal movement. It was a movement that said right and wrong do exist. It was a movement that said, there are two forces clashing. There's good and evil in the world, and we are on the side of good. And because we're on the side of good, we are going to mobilize as a collective to achieve that good. That's what communism is. That's illiberal. Liberalism says there is no right and wrong. There is no truth. There's only competing narratives. And liberalism says that if anyone comes along and tries to tell you that good and evil do exist and tries to set an agenda, if they do that, they are building a cult. They're mind controlling. They're totalitarian. Blah 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 blah. And if you read The Struggle for a Proletarian Party by James Cannon, and he's the leader of the Socialist Workers' Party, and oh, that's a good question. Writing it down. If you read The Struggle for a Proletarian Party, right, he's making clear that, look, we are building an illiberal movement, and these people want to build a liberal movement. And that's really what the difference is. The middle class wants an illiberal movement that says there is no right and wrong and wants, open debate and transparency and all that. We're building, even though we've broken with the Russian Revolution, we're still holding on to the Bolshevik way of doing things, which is that there is one truth, there is right and wrong, there's good and evil in the world, and we're on one side, and that we're going to operate in a way that we adhere to certain truths, and we have certain discipline and rules for our membership, and people are required to carry out certain tasks, whether they agree or disagree, So Cannon and the Trotskyites were trying to hold on to the illiberal aspects of Bolshevism, and the New York intellectuals were so pro-imperialist and middle class that they were trying to be illiberal. right? And actually, there's a lot of good talks. The Holt Marxist Library, which is like it's a building in San Francisco. I've never been there, but they have a website, and on it there's a lot of audio recordings of speeches by leaders of the Socialist Workers' Party talking about the fight with the New York intellectuals. James Cannon speaks about it. There's a guy named Harry Ring, I think was his name. And they're good talks that leaders of the Socialist Workers' Party give about the New York intellectuals and what the difference was. And if you really look at it, it was about the New York intellectuals were liberals. They believed in the ideology of liberalism. They believed in philosophical irrationalism. They believed that right and wrong don't exist. They believed that they believed in deconstruction. They believed in individualism. And the Socialist Workers' Party and the Trotskyites overall, they tried to at least hold on to the Bolshevik mindset, which was an illiberal mindset. So that is really the difference. But James Cannon, and yeah, there was a layer of people like I'm trying to remember. I mean, there was a layer of New York City Trotskyists who held on to Trotsky's teachings and did not become liberals or social democrats or neocons. But I would maintain they were still traitors because they had turned against the government of the Soviet Union, right? So you're asking me, are there any New York intellectuals that didn't sell out? I mean, what does sell out mean is my question, because the foundation for being one of the New York intellectuals was a break with the Soviet Union. You were against the Soviet Union, right? That is what the foundational principle was. And they went in all different directions, right? They went in many different directions. Hannah Arendt, Susan Sontag, Mary McCarthy. Mary McCarthy was in these circles and hung out with Shachtman and all of that. Mary McCarthy. I'm trying to think, different, and obviously there was a layer of them that became Republicans. Irving Kristol was the main one who became a Republican. And from what I understand, and this is fascinating to me, so the Socialist Party of America, right, that was the old Eugene Debs Socialist Party. After Eugene Debs died, they completely cut off their affiliation with no one who supported the Russian Revolution was allowed to join, and they were an anti-communist organization. In the 1930s, you got a lot of Trotskyists and others who joined them who were somewhat sympathetic, but they were against the Soviet Union, but they liked Lenin and stuff like that. And that as the Vietnam War and the anti-Vietnam War movement escalated in about 1970, 1971, 1972, the Socialist Party of America collapsed. And the question at hand was the Vietnam War, right? Because there were a lot of people in the Socialist Party of America that supported the Vietnam War because they were so anti-communist. They called them the State Department Socialists, and among those who supported the Vietnam War, there was a shift. A lot of them had supported it at first and then gradually turned against it. But there was one faction that just fully supported the Vietnam War. They thought the USA had to win in Vietnam because Stalinism was just so bad. And when the Socialist Party collapsed, they became the Social Democrats USA, the SDUSA, and they endorsed Ronald Reagan when he ran for president in 1980. And it's very strange, but that's the Irving Kristol kind of people. Irving Kristol, people like that still thought in like socialistic terms, but were so anti-communist and so opposed to the New Left. They also didn't like the New Left. They didn't like the New Left because it was pro-Palestine, because it was engaging in militant street protests. They were people that were involved in labor unions, but were Republicans and conservatives and anti-communists, and their heritage was back to Trotskyism and the Social Democrats and all of that. But they were for Reagan, and they still exist, I guess. It's like a discussion. I don't know if they do anything anymore, but they have a discussion group. There's people that still do Social Democrats USA. Then Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, that was a layer of people who had originally supported the Vietnam War, but gradually turned against it. And they were against it because they thought the USA was losing. They were against it because they thought it was weakening American democracy and was leading the USA to become more authoritarian. And that's Michael Harrington. Michael Harrington was the main intellectual. He was from a younger generation. He was like a baby boomer, right? He was a younger guy. You had Michael Harrington, who was a well-known intellectual. He'd written The Other America, which was an expose of American poverty that was, used by the administration of Lyndon Johnson to carry out their Great Society programs. Lyndon Johnson and had carried out the Great Society, and Michael Harrington was this anti-poverty intellectual. He's the one who would begin his speeches by saying, "We already have socialism in America for the rich. Now we just need it for the poor." That was Michael Harrington, and Michael Harrington had started out supporting the Vietnam War, but turned against it gradually. And there was a layer of people around Michael Harrington that were like that. One of them was Gloria Steinem, and Gloria Steinem was a CIA operative. She had disrupted the World Youth Festival of the communists in Vienna, along with Zbigniew Brzezinski and a very young, very very young, like college aged. What's his name? The guy from Boston. I can't even remember his name. The member of Congress from Boston. What is his name? I can't remember his name. He's kind of a character. He's a guy from Boston. That guy from Boston. He was a member of Congress. He was like openly gay, and he's kind of I can't remember his name. But anyway, that guy and Susan Sontag and Brzezinski and others had like disrupted World Youth Festivals. They'd set up like a socialist youth group that was actually a CIA front, and they were just imperialist operatives, right? But they called themselves socialists. They were kind of radical. So there was that layer of people, and they had been for the Vietnam War at the beginning, but then they gradually had Barney Frank, Jeff, Barney Frank, and they had gradually turned against the Vietnam War over the course of their political development, and they were all Congress for Cultural Freedom, CIA affiliated people. That's what they were. They were all part of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and if you read any of the histories, they always talk about that and how Gloria Steinem and Barney Frank, they had this student group that was a CIA front that went around the world to communist and socialist gatherings and set off, stink bombs. They were awful. They were awful people. But they were very anti-communist, and Gloria Steinem was doing workshops paid for by the CIA about how the Vietnamese were oppressing women in Vietnam, how feminists should oppose Ho Chi Minh, and they were a pro-imperialist grouping that gradually came to oppose the Vietnam War because they thought the USA couldn't win, basically. And then there was a third faction that it still exists now. I mean, what's left of it. It calls itself the Socialist Party USA. And they run candidates in election, and that was led by the people that they were pacifists. They were against the Vietnam War because they were pacifists. They were pacifists. They were against the Vietnam War, and their leader just died, and I can't remember. He died a couple years ago, and I can't remember his name. But they were part of the War Resisters League, which was like a pacifist grouping. The War Resisters League, and they were people that were anti-communist, but they were so solidly pacifist that they were against the Vietnam War completely, and they became the Socialist Party of America. And I can't remember his name. He was the leader of them, and he was the first openly gay man to run for president of the United States, was from them. And he was the Socialist Party USA guy. I cannot remember his name. But that's how the Socialist Party, when it collapsed. And so DSA was the biggest faction, right? And DSA had a lot of funding because of its CIA links. I mean, all of them were tied in with the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the CIA from the beginning. And in the 80s, they started recruiting various ex-communists to join their group on the basis of, they said, well, look, the Maoist movement, the new communist movement and the Maoist stuff was collapsing. The October League dissolved. All these Maoist communist groups were falling apart. And so on that basis, they were saying, well, that's because communism is a foreign ideology. Look, the Soviet Union is confused and all of that. So now you need to just join social democracy. You need to join Democratic Socialists of America. And DSA became the vehicle, that a lot of ex-communists became social democrats by joining. And they had a magazine called In These Times. It was like a newspaper, and later became like a magazine called In These Times that promoted their views. And they were very big in the labor union bureaucracy, a lot of labor union bosses. And in fact, eventually John Sweeney, became the head of the AFL-CIO, and he was one of these people, right? He was one of these individuals. And he was from DSA, and Cornel West joined the Democratic Socialists of America and became kind of one of their flagship intellectuals. Still is, or maybe not. I don't know. I think there's been divisions in DSA and stuff, but it's a pretty loose organization. I think Noam Chomsky joined DSA, but called himself a dissident member. Said he disagreed with DSA's overall worldview, and it was just a new regroupment led by these kind of CIA leftists who were always anti-communists, but they were not willing to become right wingers. So that was that, right? And so that's the New York intellectuals. Gloria Steinem, Gloria Steinem and Michael Harrington and people like that. But they're younger, right? The New York intellectuals were from the so-called greatest generation, right? They were older people. They were World War II generation kind of people. Irving Kristol, Max Shachtman, Hannah Arendt, Mary McCarthy, people like that. The people who set up DSA were largely, it was Michael Harrington and his crowd of people that were much younger. Anyway, that's a long, I know this history, and this history is important, so I'm glad to share it with all of you, but I know it's a little bit obscure, and I don't know why my internet is so goddamn slow. I mean, it's like it takes forever to load one page. I mean, and it's not off, right? My internet is not off. It was off. I mean, I would know if it was off, but it's not off. It's just being so slow, so I have to stream on my phone today. So thank you all for being here. All right, this is a weird stream. I'm only on one platform. I'm on YouTube, and and we're taking super chats, and my internet is very slow, so I can't stream at that, from my apartment, from my regular mechanism, but there you go. But anyway, we got a couple more super chat questions here. Where do Iranian exiles stand on Palestine? Well, most of the Iranian exile community, most of them are anti-Israel because of, it's like an ethnic thing, right? I mean, the Shah of Iran, before he died, my understanding is the Shah of Iran said that, he said the Jews control the world, and he said some anti-Semitic stuff, and that in that part of the world, even among very pro-U.S. people, you get the belief that Israel is a conspiracy, that the Jews secretly control the world, things like that. You get those kind of views. You get those kind of views. So my understanding is, a lot of the Iranian exiles who are very, very anti-Iran and are happy to work with Israeli forces and forces aligned with Israel against Iran, they will denounce Israel, right? They will denounce Israel. They will at least support the Palestinians in fighting Israel. But they don't understand that Iran is the center of resistance, right? That a lot of Iranian exiles. Look, and this is where I don't want to be a jerk. I really don't want to be a jerk. After the Islamic Revolution of Iran, there were some people who thought the revolution wasn't over yet, and they thought Iran would go and have a full communist revolution. And Iran wasn't going to do that. And then Iraq invaded, and Iraq was aligned with the Soviet Union, had gotten all of its weapons from the Soviet Union. So in those circumstances, there were a lot of Iranian communists who got very brutally repressed. There were a lot of executions, a lot of executions, a lot of people sent to the firing squads, a lot of protesters that were protests that were brutally repressed, and that trauma is there. A lot of Iranian communists who are in exile can have a family member who was tortured, have a family member who was killed or hung, and the trauma of the revolution and the immediate aftermath of the revolution, and how the communist factions were heavily repressed by the Ayatollah, that trauma prevents them from understanding the role that Iran is playing right now. The 1980s was a long time ago. And right now, Iran is the center of anti-imperialist resistance in the Middle East, and it is heavily aligned with all the communist countries in the world. So it's not the same as it was, right? But in the 80s, Iran played a different role. Iran was trying to not be in the Soviet camp. And that was when I was in Iran. I had an interview. I hope the video of it surfaces someday. The Iranians have the video where I interviewed a woman who was one of the hostage takers, who took one of the hostages. And I interviewed her. It was a great conversation. I asked her a lot of questions. And one of the things that she talked about is how Iran really didn't want to be a Soviet-aligned country during those years. Even though they were anti-imperialist and anti-American, they didn't want to be perceived as being on the Soviet side. And that's why you'll notice that, Iran helped Ronald Reagan get elected. Did you know this? Right? That Ronald Reagan asked the Iranian government to not release the hostages until Jimmy Carter had left office. And so that's why when Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, that day the hostages that had been taken, the American hostages from the embassy, that's when they were released, right? And can you talk about treason? Ronald Reagan committed treason. Imagine your own people, your own American diplomats have been taken hostage in a foreign country, and you're running for president, and you call them up and say, hey guys, can you hold them a little longer because it'll help my political career? I mean, that's blatant treason, right? All this stuff about election meddling. Give me a break. Ronald Reagan did the ultimate election meddling. He blatantly asked, the Iranian government to not release American government employees, American diplomats who were being held hostage in order to win an election. And Iran played ball with that because they didn't want to be seen as a Soviet-aligned country. They did not, even though they were anti-imperialist, they were an anti-imperialist, independent revolutionary movement, they didn't want to be a Soviet-aligned country. And so they cooperated with that, and Ronald Reagan got elected, largely because of the hostage crisis, because Jimmy Carter was seen as failing to rescue the hostages, that his attempt to rescue the hostages failed. And so because of that, Ronald Reagan with his message of let's make America great again, we're not going to be defeated like we were during the Cold War, it resonated, and Ronald Reagan largely got elected because he worked to make sure that Americans were held hostage. But Iran during those years was playing a very different role. Iran wanted to be part of the independent layer of kind of independent third world governments that were more independent, that weren't completely controlled by the United States, but were not Soviet aligned. That's what Iran wanted to be. It seems like that was the aspiration of at least some of the figures within the early Khomeini government. But now Iran is fully in the anti-imperialist camp. It is aligned with Russia, it is aligned with China, it's aligned with Venezuela, it's aligned with Cuba. Iran is a revolutionary anti-imperialist country. But a lot of these Iranian exiles, they remember the heavy repression that was rained down on communists during the immediate aftermath of the revolution, and they are traumatized by that, and they hold on to that resentment. Which, who's to say what I would do, right? If I had experienced, I get mad when people talk shit about me on the internet. Imagine how I would feel if one of my friends got killed or murdered, right? And that's why I particularly admire Iranian communists to some degree or other, because they can be so political. I have met Iranian communists who have relatives who were killed, who have themselves, they have injuries from the times they were tortured, and they support the Islamic Republic even still because they recognize the role that it plays in anti-imperialism. That's a level of political seriousness that we need to strive to develop, because it's not easy. Right? But if you're that serious about politics that you say, you know what, I'm against the imperialists, these people that screwed me over years ago, that murdered family members of mine and all that, for whatever reason, they're now playing a good role. And so I recognize that that's heavy. That's a really hard stand to take. Not all Iranian exiles take that stand, but some do, right? But largely, even among Iranians that are not communists, a lot of Iranians are just anti-Israel. Right? Now, I think there's probably a very, very, very small minority of very, very wealthy Iranians who live in Southern California, who live in Beverly Hills, places like that, who are pro-Israel. But that is a very small minority, right? But they exist, right? And it's based on we hate the Islamic Republic, and we live with a lot of pro-Israeli folks. We live around a lot of Zionists, a lot of pro-Israeli people. And so that, people that are from the wealthiest families in Iran who really hate the Islamic Republic and are extremely wealthy. And they live in the neighborhoods where Ben Shapiro and people like that live. And that there is a layer of very, very, very wealthy Persians, right? Who don't really care about Palestine at this point. And they are living in the same neighborhoods as very, very wealthy pro-Israel people. and they just hate the Islamic Republic, and they don't care about Palestine. But that is a really small minority. That's a really, really small minority. But they exist. They do exist. I think one of them has a YouTube channel. I forget what his name is. He's got like a big YouTube channel, and he's an Iranian who just he has his YouTube channel, and he hates the Islamic Republic, and he supports Israel because they're against the Islamic Republic, and he's like a Trumper kind of conservative. They exist. They do exist. I'd say it's a small minority even among Iranian exiles who really hate the Islamic Republic. They still, on a gut level, support the Palestinians, which is interesting. The Mujahideen Khalq, one of the main factions of anti-Iran exiles in the United States, are people that are loyal to the MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq, and that's a weird Marxist faction from the Islamic Revolution. During the Islamic Revolution of Iran, you had the Tudeh Party, which was the Communist Party, the Soviet-aligned Communist Party. Then you had another group called the People's Fedayeen Guerrillas, and that were Maoists. They were Maoists. They were like Maoists and Che Guevara inspired. They wanted to wage guerrilla warfare. They were like for waging a rural countryside revolution. And then you had this other group that were called Mujahideen Khalq, which is the People's Holy Warriors. And the People's Holy Warriors, they were a group, they worshipped a guy named Masoud Rajavi, and they believed he was a prophet sent to Earth, and he was the combined reincarnation of Lenin and Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad all in one, and he was going to lead a global communist revolution centered around Islam. And they were the Islamo-Marxist faction, the Mujahideen Khalq. And they engaged in left adventurism and terrorism. They kidnapped U.S. diplomats. They bombed buildings. They were an ultra-left adventurous terrorist organization. And after the Islamic Revolution, it became very clear that they were not going to be allowed to be part of the new government that was formed. And so they became terrorists, and they blew up the Iranian parliament and killed 81 members of the Iranian parliament. Can you imagine? Like, that would be like blowing up. I mean, think about that, right? So, they were, engaging in terrorism. Eventually, they got funding from Saddam Hussein. They were airdropped into Iran as the Iranian National Liberation Army, funded by Saddam Hussein, that razed villages and slaughtered civilians. They were just a nasty group of people. They cooperated with Israeli intelligence to assassinate a number of Iranian nuclear scientists. And the Obama administration revealed that basically Israel, the Israeli Mossad, worked with them to carry out a number of assassinations in Iran, killing Iranian scientists. But yet, they continue. If you talk to MEK people, they have their anti-Iran rallies, but they'll try to tell you that they're against Israel. Well, you're cooperating with the Mossad to murder Iranian scientists. How are you against Israel? They'll try to tell you, oh no, we're against Israel. We're Muslims. We support the Palestinians. No, they don't. And unfortunately, and this is true throughout the Middle East, throughout the Arab world as well, there are a layer of people who will voice support for the Palestinians, but be against all the Palestinians' friends. Iran is the biggest friend the Palestinians ever had. Hezbollah, Iran. Even the way things are going now in Palestine is based on Iran being in a better position, and Saudi Arabia. It's like you can see Iran is the center of anti-imperialism in the Middle East. But there's a layer of people who support the Palestinians but hate Iran, hate Hezbollah, and it's weird. And that's true in the Arab world as well as among the Persian exile community, that there's a lot of people that are Muslims, that they just, as Muslims, they support the Palestinians, but they have absolutely no other understanding of geopolitics. They think Palestine good, Israel bad, and that's it. Everything else is they support the United States. They think U.S. imperialism. No, there's no such thing as U.S. imperialism. That's just a bunch of outmoded Marxist mumbo jumbo. The only problem with America is a bunch of, the Israel lobby has taken over. There's a layer of people like that. It exists, right? So I don't know. I hope that answers your question. I'm giving long answers, but there you go. If anyone has any more super chats, I'll just keep talking here. This is great. This is a great live stream, despite the circumstances here, right? I mean, the circumstances here are that, I'm having to do it under this poor technical situation, but yet we're still having a great conversation on here. So, hey, more power to it. More power to it. Maybe my internet is starting to look up a little bit here, but whatever. We'll see. So the next super chat question is from Simon, who's in Oslo, and he says, so that's why the social democratic parties refused to stand against fascism in Europe. Yeah, and they also supported World War I. I mean, the reason that the Bolsheviks divided against social democracy, right, is because social democrats supported World War I. The Second International collapsed and and supported World War I. So the Bolsheviks, they changed their name to the Communist Party rather than the Social Democratic Labor Party, and they formed the Third International. And the basis of the divide between social democratic parties and communist parties was support for World War I. And that ever since then, social democracy has made clear that it is basically just a wing of Western imperialism. They want to make Western imperialism more efficient by having a lot of welfare programs, etc. That is what social democracy really is. So, social democracy, because it's not anti-imperialist, is just a mechanism for stabilizing Western capitalism. And I talk about that. All right. Did the Soviet leadership realize that China was on the correct path to the reform? Yes, in the 80s, but it was among the Gorbachev faction. You had some in the Gorbachev faction that were becoming less and less anti-imperialist that also wanted to introduce market reforms, and that was perestroika and glasnost. But it led to a political crisis where they could bring down the Soviet Union. There was a realization. I think everybody in the Soviet Union in the 80s realized they needed to change. But the way their political system had been set up, it was too rigid, right? They could not bend, and so they broke. And that was the problem. Everyone realized to some degree or other the USSR couldn't function in the way it had always been functioning. And, perestroika was Gorbachev and his attempt to adjust the Soviet system to be more efficient, to be more like China maybe, but it didn't work because their system was so rigid. If you started messing with it, then the whole thing fell apart. If you can't bend, you break, right? And that's one of the strengths of the Chinese Communist Party is that they're constantly adjusting and changing their socialist system. It is not the same today as it was 10 years ago. It's not the same today as it was in the 80s. I mean, China is constantly reinventing its socialism. And that has been their strength. Whereas the Soviet model, especially after World War II, became so entrenched and rigid and it couldn't change, and so it fell. You have to be able to constantly adapt and evolve, right? And that's why on my organization, we're called the Center for Political Innovation. That's why we're called, because political innovation is so important. If you don't adapt and change, and if you're not constantly innovating in any system, right, or any business or anything, if you're not constantly adjusting and adapting, you die, right? So there you go. There you go. Do you feel that events happening in Israel and Palestine are just a religious prophecy being fulfilled? No, I don't. But maybe I do, but not in the way you think, right? I think the book of Revelations in the Bible was very clearly written by members of the early Christian church as a manifesto condemning the Roman Empire and predicting the fall of the Roman Empire, and condemning Christians who collaborate with the Roman Empire. It was a polemic, and it spoke of those who speak in the name of Christ but serve the empire, spoke of those who say they are Jews but are not Jews, the synagogue of Satan, and it was clearly, the book of Revelations there was a fight in the early Christian church about, do we align ourselves with the Roman Empire? Do we water down Christianity to accommodate the Roman Empire? Or do we hold on to our principles and get persecuted? And they describe the Roman Empire in its economic foundations, right? It describes how the Roman Empire was a middleman in global trade, and that's the whole number of the beast, right? The idea is that in order to trade, you must bear the number of the beast, meaning that basically the Roman Empire, the way it functioned was if you in order to do business, you had to go through them, right? All roads lead to Rome. Right, and that you couldn't build a road from one section of the empire to the other. All business went through them. That's what the Roman Empire was like. It was a global Atlanticist empire that controlled trade routes with use of military force in order to dominate the global economy. And that all the wealth of the world was constantly going to one city, and Rome was mainly a military force that, enforced control of global trade routes and enriched itself. And that comes across. You read the book of Revelations, when they talk about the Antichrist, 666, all of that, they're talking very clearly about imperialism as an economic model. And they're talking about how amid the Roman Empire functioning this way, there's a layer of people, who claim to be Christians, but are adopting and accommodating with the Roman Empire. And that is one of the main targets of the book of Revelations, right? And the book of Revelations makes clear that it's those who stay true, to Christ who will be rewarded. And it's condemning those Christians that were watering down Christian beliefs in order to make them accommodate and fit the Roman Empire and its beliefs. That's what it was about. It was addressing contemporary events. It wasn't a prophecy for something that would happen thousands of years from now. But, and here's where I'm getting, I do think it is actually a prophecy for what we're seeing now, because we're living in the same system. Imperialism, Western capitalism, imperialism, is just like the Roman Empire. It's just like the Roman Empire in that it is a global monopolistic system that is controlling the trade routes, right? The book of Revelations talks about, the number of the beast is 666, and you have to have the number of the beast to do global trade. Well, that's why the imperialists are trying to crush the BRICS, because the BRICS doesn't bear the number of their beast. The BRICS is not under their control, so they want to crush it. That's why they have the petrodollar, right? The petrodollar, right? They want, no one can trade in dollars unless you do it with their currency. So what they're describing in the book of Revelations, right, is basically the same economic system that the Western capitalist imperialists have now. So it is a prophecy in a way. And then it's condemning, all right? And then the Christians are those that were being persecuted by that system, people that lived in Rome or lived in Corinth or lived in Galatia or wherever, and were against that system, and were organizing like an underground community of brotherhood of working people, proletarians who cared for one another and protected each other and wanted to bring down the empire. Right, and were being persecuted. But among those early Christians, some of them were watering down Christianity, to accommodate the empire. And so whoever this John, right? So a lot of Christians think that John in the book of Revelations was John the Apostle. That is not, it doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. It actually, and it doesn't say that in the historical record either. There's no record of Apostle John the Apostle, one of the 13 disciples of Jesus, going to the Isle of Patmos. There's no record of that. So we don't know that the John in the book of Revelations is the same John that is in, the Gospel of John. We don't know that, right? We do know that some guy named John, who was a Christian, was sent to the Isle of Patmos, right? And he was sent to the Isle of Patmos, just saying goodbye to my wife. She's going for a walk. She's going, enjoy. And we know that some guy named John was sent to an Isle of Patmos, and he had some kind of vision, and he wrote his vision down. And that vision was so important to the early Christian church that it survived. There were many, many different, you have to remember that the Bible was not originally one text, right? Originally, there was none of it was written down. It was an oral tradition. It was like stories that Jesus had told, stories that people who knew Jesus told each other. And then after a while, all the people that had known Jesus started dying. And so they said, we got to write this down. So every church building had a scroll in the back that was just, their writing down of the oral tradition. And it was just a bunch of scrolls. And then we know that eventually, as the church was consolidating, you got, the Council of Nicaea that made a formal text that was like the official Bible. And that for whatever reason, the revelation to John that was written down was this vision that some guy named John had on the Isle of Patmos, was considered so important to the early Christian church that they put that in the Bible, right? This text that was written long after Jesus had existed, it was so important to the early Christian church, they said this has to go into the Bible. And if you read it, it is a condemnation of the Christians that were selling out, right? And it is an explanation of what the Roman Empire was and how it functioned. And it was saying that it would be defeated by Christianity, that Christ would defeat the Antichrist. And it was then saying that there will be some Christians who've sold out and they're going to face punishment, but it's those of us who stay true to the cause, we're the ones who are going to be rewarded. Is that prophecy for our modern time? Absolutely, but not in a literal sense. I don't think, it wasn't like whoever this John on the island was, was sitting there going, oh, yes, yes, and there will be Barack Obama, and then there will be Donald Trump. It wasn't like that. But he was writing about the economics of the Roman Empire and how the economics of the Roman Empire would lead to a collapse. But how, in his time, and in our time too, there are those who claim and speak in the name of a movement that opposes that system, but are actually accommodating with it, right? And that's very clear. And I argue that communism is Christianity 2.0, right? That communism is just Christianity without spirituality, and Christianity is just spirituality without economics, without science, right? And that the proletarian movement, Christianity became the expression of the wage workers of Rome, and it was their movement that said we have to care for each other and organize and resist empire. And that in Europe, as capitalism was developing and as you got a proletarian class, the word proletarian comes from ancient Rome. It's the word for a wage worker. That there emerged in Rome, there emerged a movement, or in Western Europe, you had the rise of proletarians once again. That communism was the same social formation. It is an expression of a movement that is in the interest of wage workers. And that's the communism in Christianity. Christianity was the way to be a communist in ancient Rome, and that communism is the way to be a Christian in modern Western society. But just like early Christianity was corrupted, I argue that communism has been corrupted, and that social democracy is the same as what was going on at that time, right? And that it refers to the same phenomenon. And that to be a true Christian meant you were against the Roman Empire. It means you didn't want any accommodation with the Roman Empire. And to be a true communist means you're against Western capitalism and imperialism. It means you don't want any accommodation with imperialism, right? And so it is prophecy for our time, I would argue, right? I mean, it is in a lot of ways, right? And that the Antichrist and the system where they control global trade, and they must be the only middleman, and they crush anyone who opposes them, will be defeated. And that those who have accommodated with imperialism and adjusted their views to support the imperialists, and have sold out to accommodate the imperialists and claim to be socialists or communists, but in reality are serving the imperialists, they will go down with the ship of imperialism. They will, and meanwhile, it'll be those of us who stay true to anti-imperialism, who are loyal, is us, we will rule, if you want to put it that way, but we're going to be the ones that will preside over the creating of a new socialist society in this country, right? If that's what that means, right? I mean, it's not about power or anything, but it'll be us ultimately when it'll be us ultimately when socialism comes to the West, and when we have a new world free of imperialism. It'll be us who are tasked with the duty of presiding over it and becoming the most important leaders of this socialist society, because we are the ones who understood the principles and never abandoned them and proved that we are trustworthy. And so, as the book of Revelations talks about, we will reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Now, not literally 1,000 years, but we will, because we stood true to our principles and because we were against the imperialists and we never accommodated with them. When socialism comes to the West, it'll be us that'll be trusted enough to facilitate the development of a socialist society in the West, because we never surrendered. So I think that what was being articulated in the book of Revelations, an opposition to the Roman system, a belief that you need to hold on to resistance to it, a belief that those who accommodate with it will be punished and will be rejected along with it. Those, in a way, it is all coming true, and it is a prophecy in that sense, but not in the literal sense, right? That's just too simplistic. The evangelical narrative of what the Book of Revelations is it's like kindergarten stuff, right? It has no understanding of economics. It has no understanding of the role that the early church played. It's just kindergarten stuff. It's just, oh, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. All right, and as long as we're good and follow all the rules, then we'll be taken care of. It's not that simple. Context is everything. Nuance is everything. And you have to understand that if you're going to do revolutionary work. All right, folks. So I will be back tonight. Hopefully, I can get my regular streaming software to work. Hopefully, the internet speeds up and starts functioning in a healthy, normal way. If not, I'll be on my phone again, but I'll be back tonight. I'm going to stream tonight. But I got to get ready for the CPI afternoon meeting. Yeah, be in touch, everybody. Be in touch. Yeah, I guess I have to do the mantra myself. I can't put it on the screen. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have continuously been launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody. I'll be back this evening